That would be really helpful. Thank you, Connor. Thanks everyone, that's perfect. Just so that we can check that everyone can actually hear. Thank you very much. So if you can clear those ticks now, we will proceed with this evening's session. First of all, thank you so much for coming. I know many of you have been at school all day and probably sort of tired and ready to go home, but thank you very much for being here. What we're going to talk about today is maximising the impact of pupil digital leaders. Just before we get started, it'd be really interesting from my point of view to know whereabouts you guys are coming from in terms of your roles in school and those kinds of things. So if you could just update in the chat box, your sort of job role in school. Are you an ICT or computing coordinator, a class teacher, leadership member, those kind of things. And then whether or not you're primary or secondary, or maybe an all-through school, middle school. And finally, if you could let me know if you work in the state or independent sector, that would be really helpful for me just to understand where participants are coming from today. I'll give you a few seconds to do that, and then we'll crack on. Okay, so that helps to clarify a few things. And since we're all coming from sort of UK state primary schools, then we will hopefully have lots of sort of shared ideas and things that we can discuss together at various points during the presentation. On that note, if anything isn't clear at any point, then please do use the chat box to ask questions. If something comes to mind at any point, please feel free to interrupt by doing that. I'll try and pick things up as we go through. I'll also provide maybe one or two sort of opportunities. So at the break, for example, and right at the end of the session, we'll have a couple of minutes sort of question and answer style time if we feel that that's necessary. But by all means, feel free to add anything as we go through. Okay, so let's begin by just giving you a whirlwind tour of Chris Mayoh, the man in front of you. I'm currently working as an independent consultant, working with primary schools and secondary schools across the UK and beyond. And I do a variety of things. I largely work with teachers and leadership teams on maybe embedding the new computing curriculum across school, integrating new technologies for a variety of purposes across a variety of subject areas. We do an awful lot of work around e-safety and safeguarding, and one of my absolute massive passions is on student digital leadership schemes. So I've supported primary schools, secondary schools, and I'm currently working with an FE college in Norwich to put these kind of programs together. I've worked with around about 85 different schools and education establishments now to run these kind of projects. So hopefully as we go through, the benefit of the experiences that I've had will be passed on and shared at various points. I also currently still work as a part-time computing leader at a Bradford primary school. So what I hope that brings, as well as me, saying to you all of these things and coming up at you hopefully with ideas, what I'd like you to understand is that I'm actually doing this at the same time. So since the new computing curriculum came in, I have been delivering it in a primary school in Bradford, which is it's a pretty tough school. There's some challenging kids, and obviously the computing curriculum provides all sorts of challenges in and of itself. So I am actually doing that for a couple of days a week as well. So I do teach year 1 to year 6. It's a one-form entry primary school, so I do have computing lessons with those children as well. So hopefully these are real and relevant examples, and I do have a group of year 4 and 5 pupil digital leaders at school too. So this is all sort of fresh from the chalk face, if you like. And then a little bit of information about sort of the past and where I've been previously. This time last year, I wasn't in the UK. I was in Moscow as the head of ICT at a large international school. So I taught across the age range there, and again had primary and secondary student digital leaders. Prior to that, I worked in Bradford as a local authority consultant, working on ICT as it was at the time. And I also that's where I first started working with lots of schools on student digital leadership models. We actually had at one point about 60 primary schools in the whole of Bradford, and 2 secondary schools that I worked with directly to roll out pupil digital leadership schemes, and that was very successful. And previously, I'd worked in Bradford, Stockport, and Manchester in a variety of kind of ICT leadership sort of roles. So yeah, hopefully a fairly extensive background in this kind of thing. So this is where it all came from in terms of my particular context and how I got involved in this whole kind of idea. It all started really at Bowling Park Primary School, which is a school in Bradford that I taught at since 2008. And we knew as a school that one of our weaknesses was in finding ways to provide extra challenge to some students. We knew we'd invested very, very heavily in technology. We were a three-form entry inner city primary school, and as a result, we had a rather large budget. And the head teacher was very, very good at spending that flexibly and spending it on ICT resources. So we were a really, really well-resourced school. I always described us as over-resourced because we just had so much stuff. We bought 122 iPads, we had 90 iPod touches, rooms full of computers, laptop trolleys, all kinds of things. So we really did have a lot of stuff. But what we weren't doing is challenging some of those very, very able pupils with some of this technology. We weren't really using it to enable them to be as good as they could possibly be in some subject areas, and that was a real challenge for us. And we just realised that wasn't quite as strong as it could be. So when we're thinking about maximising the impact, think about all groups of pupils in school. Actually, yes, this is about reaching everybody, but if you've got a really, really able group, digital leadership really lends itself quite nicely to that kind of group. We also had our very good friends at Ofsted come and pay us a lovely visit, and one of the things they wrote in the final written report was that actually developing independent learning where people's at the centre of activities was something that we needed to do in order to help raise attainment. Now that ties in exactly with what we were already saying about needing to find a way of providing challenge. We knew this was an issue, and as we were sort of working our way through the process, Ofsted came in and they said basically the same thing with that statement that you can see on screen. So we did think about child-centred kind of activities, and we weren't quite sure how it would work, but we were certainly thinking about these kind of ideas. The real spark for me was when I went to an event in Manchester in October 2010, so we are going back almost 5 years. Microsoft ran an event called the Innovative Education Forum, at which I was very, very lucky to meet some wonderful, wonderful people. I met a man called Dan Stuck and a man called Christian Still, both of whom were secondary school teachers who just ran, in collaboration with Toshiba, a really, really interesting, exciting sounding pupil digital leadership scheme. It was part funded by Toshiba, which was obviously very helpful. But actually what I took away from the essence of what they were saying was that anybody can do this. Any school in any context can set up this digital leadership model. It doesn't really matter what the technology is. It just matters that you've got pupils who have skills. You have technology in your school, whatever that technology is. And if we combine those two things, we actually could have potentially quite a powerful set of people and tools in our schools there. So even if the technology is calculators, graphing calculators, for example, maybe in a secondary context, I know we're all coming from a primary background, but actually, you could very easily teach people to use those kind of things. It might be something much more sophisticated, but it really needn't be. So I took a lot away from that, and really thought that this digital leadership scheme was something that we could really take away. Now we know that the idea of student pupil-centred learning is not a new concept. It's absolutely nothing new. And we know it's nothing new because how long have schools had school councils, student councils? This whole student voice thing isn't something that I'm evangelizing about from a